let me describe a little bit the landscape of mobile advertising, and in particular, how does display fit into this landscape. The time that we are spending on mobile phones surfing the internet is massively growing, and this is also happening in the developed world in a very, very consistent and robust way. Obviously, the time that we are spending on the internet on mobile phones, so basically this is non-voice time spent on mobile, has become 4 times bigger over the last 4 years. On average, we are spending over an hour on our mobile phones just surfing. Advertisers have taken notice, so basically the advertising spend on mobile has increased massively. This is happening, the top figure on the left is for the United States. You see similar figures at the bottom for the world. To some extent, I have the suspicion that these figures are a little bit underestimated because you see this massive growth in 2012. I don't see why that rate of growth would so dramatically decrease in the next couple of years. It is also not very surprising which are the countries that are most responsible for this growth. You would see obviously the Nordic countries in Europe, the United States, Canada. You would see Japan and South Korea. Sorry, North Korea is not quite there yet, I think. Advertising spending, if you spend a lot of time on mobile, obviously advertisers are going to go there. And again, on the left side, you see a bunch of figures that show the evolution. But when you put the two things together, it is important to see this discrepancy. And I think this is the bottom line, that we would like to see some coherence between the amount of time spent on the medium and the amount of money spent on the medium, and you see a huge discrepancy, especially for mobile. You see some discrepancy also, obviously, for newspapers in the other direction. But the question to ask is, why aren't those dollars there today? And I think that the common answer is that mobile advertising may not work that well. And similarly, while newspapers are getting less and less audience or less and less timeshare, the dollar spent on newspapers or magazines is still quite high because those type of advertisings work. We had hundreds of years to figure out how to make them work, actually. And there is also a big discussion about the type of advertising that you should be using. Should it be display advertising? Or should it be, should people pay for clicks? And what you see is that there is a discussion. It is true that advertisers like to pay for clicks because that's a concrete action, and that is reconforting. But there are figures that show that conversion rates from clicks to purchases are actually quite low on mobile, much lower than on the desktop computer. And that is really the puzzle that got us started in this study. How is it possible that these tiny little pictures are going to be working? Now that I'm looking at this example, I'm not that surprised that they are working. What exactly is going to be their impact? Are they going to trigger purchases, or are they going to trigger awareness? Are they good at triggering preference or increase purchase intentions, maybe? So these are the kind of questions that come to mind. Also, what product category? Big question. What product categories should they work for? Okay, should it be high involvement products, so important purchases like cars? It's kind of difficult to believe. Although I will show you and I will try to convince you that this is the case. Is it better for utilitarian or hedonic products? Hedonic products being the ones where you're consuming something for pleasure rather than utilitarian products that are sort of more practical and are helping you with some pragmatic need. And the whole study lasted about 3 years. So this is a little bit of a limitation because, over these 3 years, we have heard how fast this space is changing. Well, over 3 years, it has changed quite a bit. But still, we had a pretty exhaustive set of products, from automobiles to travel to fast-moving consumer goods, finance, health services, and so forth. About 40,000 people participated in the study, which is quite nice. It's a quite nice sample. And the basic idea was that half of them were exposed, they were randomly selected into 2 groups, roughly equal groups. Actually, I have a little design here. Half of them were exposed to some advertising. Okay, you see the little banner ad there. But both groups were asked to fill in a very short questionnaire, a very short survey. And the survey really just asked them 2 questions, a couple of others, but really just 2 important questions. How would you describe your overall opinion about the product? So basically on a 5-point scale. And what is your purchase intention? So what are the findings? So let me just share very quickly what are the findings. So somewhat surprisingly, in fact quite surprisingly, we found that the advertisements worked for high involvement products, so important purchases, rather than simple purchases such as cars, or some consumer durables, some expensive consumer durables like a fridge or a TV or some sort of a product like that. Also, we found that the advertisements worked for utilitarian products and didn't quite work for hedonic products. So travel, restaurants, movies didn't quite work. But utilitarian product, practical purchases, that went fine. It turns out that these 2 factors increase the likelihood of a response independently, but they greatly reinforce one another. Okay, so if the product is utilitarian and high involvement, this is when it works best. And obviously, if there is some prior awareness about them, this is another question that was sort of collected in the survey, then again you see a somewhat stronger effect. I will talk about this mediation at the end. It's not that important. Okay? So what is the mechanism? So the mechanism, we believe, is very simple. We somehow still don't believe that these ads are transferring any information. So our theory is that what happens is that the ads are actually reminding you of other campaigns, or remind you of product information that you may have acquired in other ways. Okay? That is basically the typical, the idea that we have. So you see the ad, it reminds you of another campaign, and why would this happen for high involvement products is because you care about high involvement products more. Okay? So, for example, think about a car purchase. This is a long-term decision. You spend a lot of time on it, going back and forth. You gather information in a quite careful way. All this information is stored in your memory. When you see the ad, some of this information related to the ad is going to be reminded to you, and you will be sort of processing that information quite carefully, because it's a high involvement brand. Okay? Now, another thing that we know is that when you have high involvement, when you process things in such a careful way, you use what we call central root processing. Okay, this is a very well-known theory from the 1980s. You will be, instead of using your emotions, you actually are going to be using the sort of rational part of your brain. You will be creating trade-offs. You will be weighing information one way or another. Okay, and this type of processing lends itself to utilitarian products. It really works for utilitarian products. Okay, so the reminded information, if you are reminded some ads or some other information, it is more likely that this information is going to be used in the case of utilitarian products as opposed to hedonic ones. So what are the conclusions? What are the implications? And I think this is probably the most important slide. Obviously, there is a very simple takeaway, namely that you should be using these campaigns for utilitarian and high involvement brands. So this is the simple one. But I think that a more important implication is that you should make sure that people have something to recall, that you don't use these campaigns independently. The role of the display advertising is to reinforce high bandwidth campaigns and keeping their messages on top of people's minds. So if you are to sell a car to someone, you want to show them a lot of information that is going to trigger their purchase intentions, but that information is going to be processed over a long period of time. Okay? And in the meantime, you want them to sort of recall that information from time to time. So if a small little banner appears on their mobile phones, well, that might actually do the trick and may result in a much more effective advertising campaign.